Hi everyone, my name is Bredenkamp. I am going to talk today about Translators Without Borders work with the Rasa platform. A little bit about me. My background is in natural language processing. I founded a company not far from Rasa HQ in Berlin around almost 20 years ago. I was a founding board member of TWB about 10 years ago. I joined up a few months ago to help establish our programs in DRC, Congo. There, on the basis of that and experiences in Bangladesh and Nigeria, I developed some ideas around how to use tech to help with the situation there. A little bit about TWB. Our driving principle is to give people access to information. Information in the wrong language can be worse than useless, as many of you may have experienced. In trivial situations, this can be annoying, but it can also be fatal. More people die from lack of information than lack of medication. There are simple, low-tech solutions to many of the most common problems which threaten people's lives. And particularly in the context of the COVID-19 epidemic, many people have seen that there's not just an epidemic, but there's an infodemic. There's waves of information, much of it false, with a hidden agenda to cause trouble or worse. The provision of information in a way that people can use gives them agency and has a huge impact on their lives. So that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing. Most of our work is in the context of humanitarian efforts, so crisis response. We work with some of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world, the UN agencies, the Red Cross organizations, and societies, and many of the large international NGOs to provide support in their responses. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the work in Eastern DRC, a very large country. Here you can see it overlaid on Western Europe, a huge country with lots of diversity. A number of over 200 languages spoken in the country, although we're going to be focusing on probably 3 or 4 languages. The large brown swathe in the east is Swahili, the dark blue in the top left of the country. The west is Lingala. Those are the 2 main languages, local languages we're starting with, and obviously French as the former colonial language, as a former Belgian colony, is important, although less than half the population understand French. So as we move on through this language context, why is this important to us? In the context of our work, what we're looking to do is community engagement. What this means is traditionally, this meant going out with a megaphone and trying to talk to local crowds and give them critical information with no real way of understanding or of measuring whether they were understanding, getting the message or not. Typically nowadays, people are more focused on talking and listening and having a conversation. Going out and organizing workshops and sessions where people can not just talk and give information, but also listen and understand a bit more of the context. But obviously, in the world of COVID-19, in the context of COVID-19, this is no longer possible in many situations. So you can think of what we're doing with the conversational AI as building contactless community engagement, a way of reaching people and engaging them in conversation without having to to get in front of them. The problem is, with any of these contexts, is they're very complicated. L3 bots, a sophisticated conversation, is seen as quite new and quite a little bit scary. So typically the humanitarian community has gone with very old style IVR, menu-driven communications. The world of humanitarians and tech don't typically talk very much. The world of tech kind of tends to think it can solve all the problems. It knows how to solve problems without talking to anyone else. And the humanitarians, on the other hand, are a little bit wary of tech in general, not sure quite how to deal with it. So, part of our task has been to bring those two worlds together. But outside those tech considerations, the issue is also with the community, the people we're trying to reach. Everyone is multilingual. And in that context, many of you will have seen language maps. We create these language maps in order to drive awareness of the diversity in a particular country. India is fairly well known, but many people consider other countries, also because it's a political statement, to be much more monolingual than they are. Here's a language map from Indonesia showing that Javanese is probably the most common language spoken across the country. And you can see the shades of blue are marking to what extent people speak Bahasa Indonesian, the main language, the main official language of the country. And depending on where you're then working, that may not be the language you need to communicate with people. Specifically, a few recent situations, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones. Here you can see one that went across the north of the Philippines. And while everyone in Manila speaks Tagalog, not so many in the north. And therefore your strategy to communicating with those people needs to be different. Similarly, a recent cyclone in across Mozambique and the southeast Africa went over an area which was quite a long way from the capital, where everyone speaks Portuguese, more or less, where less than half the population will speak Portuguese again. So you need to think about how to reach those people. So our goals for this conversational AI was to enable two-way communication, not just telling people stuff, but listening to them. Obviously, we want to influence behavior, help people understand what the best guidance is for their particular situation, help to track and address rumors and myths and false information, but also capture the voice of the community. Understand who the people are we're engaging with by capturing some demographics through surveys, so we can run surveys about other topics, but also to capture a little bit about their sentiment. How do they feel about certain things? So conversation in a very real sense. We've created some sort of guiding principles for the way we want to create conversational AI. We've come up with this rather cheesy acronym of FUN. They need to be fresh, useful, and natural. The natural piece comes from the natural language and being able to design dialogues that are engaging. But fresh is really important to us. Having a quick turnaround for editorial, so this thing is not static, but is using live information, is updated often on a daily or weekly cadence. And that it's useful to the people, so not content that's designed in Geneva or New York, but content that's designed with the context in mind and with the needs of the community, reacts to the needs of the community. So how are we doing it? The Rasa platform we selected on the basis of I think 3 key criteria. For us, it was very important that we could build our own language models. Many of the languages we will be working in, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, the next countries, Nigeria and Bangladesh in South Asia, are in situations where the languages are not well supported. Nigeria, Hausa is quite well supported. In Bangladesh, Bengali. But beyond that, very little out-of-the-box support with existing language models. So we're going to have to build our own, and therefore the ability to build those pipelines ourselves was very important to us. Secondly, the ability to get this external content, external knowledge via APIs was very important to us. And thirdly, the connectors. We need to be very flexible. Initially, we're going out through Telegram and WhatsApp and Viber and other text messaging platforms. But in low connectivity contexts outside the urban areas, we're going to have to be using SMS, and probably in the medium term also voice on either end of the conversation. So that flexibility was very important to us. The way we're setting this up is to have a global enablement team with conversational design, the tech platform work, and most of the NLP and NLU work done globally in one team. Our team is very distributed, so nobody's sitting in an office in HQ somewhere, but this is a very tight-knit global team, and they will then enable local teams who will effectively own the content. Language specialists, community engagement experts, and obviously liaison with local partners, national societies, governments, and increasingly also digital experts in those countries to help build what we need for those contexts. And so the idea is that we can scale this very quickly. After we've worked on these 3 countries, we're going to be rolling out to probably another 7 countries or more, each one with its own language requirements and its own particular context. So the idea is we can build one platform, manage that platform, and but make bots for every place that's needed differently. So as we look at this, we're obviously very interested in keeping it fun, in keeping this very fast cycle where we're able to quickly interact with, build a sort of newsroom with local partners and our own content curators, and then use the Rasa platform to deploy that, but maybe also deploy in other types of content, posters and leaflets and radio, but use all of that to gather more insights through obviously through the logging that Rasa gives us, but in also through other contexts, to then feed back into the process of what the content is, what the content needs to be for the next cycle, and really keep that moving quite quickly. We're moving at speed, so we're really looking to get a weekly cadence to the updates of the bot. And as we build that, and as we look to enable local teams, obviously the tech that we can use is rather limited. So as we automate this process, we're going to have to go from as low tech a solution on one end to the full bot on the other end. So what we've built is basically a model of the multilingual bots in Google Sheets, and then a continuous integration pipeline with building and testing and deploying into the cloud directly using some Python to join up all the dots, so that we can go from multilingual bots from a single model. The local teams are then simply working in Google Sheets. Here's an example of one of the NLU files we used early on. We've since divided this up a little bit, but we can build the same models for some of the content. Obviously, the COVID myth stuff is fairly easy to replicate from one region to another, but obviously the bots will diverge over time as we learn more about the community. And then we've also built what we're calling a story builder, which allows the team, for many of the stories, for many of the intents, the stories are created automatically. But for some of those outside edge cases, the stories need to be built by hand. So we've created a little a story builder with a bit of automation in it, where you can pick what the user does, what the bot does. Here, the user is asking for local statistics. We're telling them at the moment we don't have any local statistics. So first of all, we're picking a bot response, and then we're going to run a bot action to go and get the national statistics, which we do have, give them those statistics, and then we're going to ask them if there's anything else that they'd like to ask us, so that we can move the conversation on. Finally, we're very keen on measuring how we're doing, tracking the number of conversations and the number of turns, but also building more and more user feedback around how the bot is working into the bot's conversations itself, asking for user feedback on specific elements without making it too heavy, but also asking how are we doing as a bot, how was this conversation useful, if not, tell us how we can maybe change it. We're looking also at tracking the way in which the direction in which the conversations go, to see whether we're helping in some way, whether we can identify how we're helping in some way with changing the conversation. So maybe some myths, if we invest a lot of effort in putting up videos and other content around certain myths, whether we can then convince people to stop asking about them. Only really going to be a correlation, but nevertheless an interesting one if we can track it at scale. And I think the last thing we're looking at doing, and I'd welcome input on this, ideas from anyone else, looking obviously to drive engagement by encouraging users to return, also by keeping it fresh, and encouraging them to pass it on to their friends if they find it useful. So that's our story. I think there's a few minutes for questions, so thank you very much.